Hello and welcome to The Wrap, WRAL's politics podcast. I am your host, Will Doran, here with our Capitol Bureau Chief, Laura Leslie. It has been a busy week in state politics, Laura.
I'm so glad it's Friday. It was some kind of week. This is usually the slow time of year when they all go home. No.
Yeah, you would think that people might have still been on vacation for the 4th of July. That was very much not the case. It was jam-packed here. You were this morning at an event with Governor Roy Cooper where he was talking about a big update on our Medicaid rules after we've been implementing Medicaid expansion. What did he have to say there?
Right. So they hit the 500,000 mark, so 500,000 in 7 months, which apparently is quite a lot. It's a lot faster than most states have done it. Now, I think it's fair to mention that we had a little bit of a head start because during COVID, the federal government made more people eligible for Medicaid. So some of these people were already maybe not receiving benefits, but had been in the system during COVID. So it was a little easier to know who they were, right, and to go get them. But even so, that would account for about 300,000 of them, which is about what they had when they first started. So he said they've been signing people up, at the rate of about 1,000 people a day.
That's amazing.
So
wow.
Yeah, so there's still they think there's still about 100,000 eligible folks out there, and they're aiming to get them. But they give a lot of credit today to the community advocates and the people on the ground that have really kind of made this work.
Yeah, and I mean 500,000 people, probably most of them out in rural parts of the state. Based on the numbers we had seen, could be huge for rural economies as people can get treated for the health problems that have stop them from holding down a job.
And that was one thing that Cody Kinsley mentioned today. He said they filled 1.9 million prescriptions already for just the new people, right, newly eligible people. And he said the majority of those are for chronic conditions. They're for seizures. They're for asthma, right? They're for things that people were dealing with without medication, right? So, I mean, that can't help but improve your quality of life and your ability to make a living.
Yeah. I should note that it was not only healthcare policy that you were talking with the governor about today. Politics was also on the agenda. There's been a lot of talk about President Joe Biden and whether or not he is going to continue on as the presidential candidate. Obviously, he has said that he is, but there's a lot of chatter that maybe Kamala Harris will take over. And how does Roy Cooper fit into all that?
Well, there was a story this morning in the NYT and saying that somebody who was close to, apparently there is a plan if this were to happen, and somebody who was close to the plan said that Cooper was at the top of the list as a possible VP nominee. And well, that's not the first time we've heard this, right? His name's been swirling around, occasionally as a VP pick, although most of the time it was sort of thought of as sort of blue sky,
even as a presidential pick. I mean, I was on a podcast with was it David Plouffe, who was Obama's campaign manager. This was a couple of years ago, and he was asking me all about Roy Cooper and, what would be his chances if he were to run for president? This is 2020, 2021, something like that. I mean, people have been talking about him for a while.
Right. Well, I'm not a homer here, but I am going to say there are a few reasons that make sense for that, right? Number one, of course, he's termed out. So at the end of the year, he's done being governor. Number two, we've got the Medicaid expansion, which he's been making sure to keep in the headlines, right? And also economic development. I mean, look at the successes that his administration has had, and he is primarily the one responsible for economic development in the state. And so, there's a couple of serious sort of accomplishments that I think they're able to point to, if they were to put him on the ticket.
Yeah, I mean, North Carolina was ranked 2 years in a row as the number one state for business. We just saw this week we dropped down to number 2. Sucks to not be number one, but still right up there at the top.
They changed the number one. They changed the top thing that mattered to infrastructure, and infrastructure week came a little late to North Carolina. We're getting a lot of it now, right? And I will give the kudos to the lawmakers. They put a lot of money in the last couple of years into water, but that money was needed like 10 years ago.
Yes.
So and also the electrical grid. As some other reporters have pointed out. So anyway, but we digress. Anyway, so we were asking him, at this press conference, did you talk to Kamala Harris about this in Greensboro? Because he was at the event, of course. The governor's always there to welcome.
Well,
And
sometimes they skip these events if they don't necessarily want to be associated with the president who's speaking.
Cooper's not one of those. Cooper's been really supportive of the Biden administration, and so anyway, he said that he said the speculation is ill-timed and unproductive, and he said he only talked to them about Joe and Kamala winning, and I asked him, I said, okay, have you talked to anyone about a vice presidential run, and he's in a vice presidential job, and he said no. So
okay, there it is.
Yeah, you take that for what you will. But anyway, yeah. So Kamala was here, by the way, and that was Thursday, and she did a rally in Greensboro. And I talked to people at the rally, and the people I talked to at the rally did not, the ones I talked to did not say that they wanted to see Biden off the ticket.
Interesting, because these are people coming out to see Kamala Harris speak. So you'd think that maybe there would be some people in the crowd who are, hoping that this is more or less a dry run for her, practicing being the presidential candidate.
Right. But, well, one woman I talked to said, that it was too late. Too late for that, and that she thought, well, if something were to happen, God forbid, to Joe Biden, and then Kamala would be there and would be prepared to step in. But I was expecting more of what you're talking about, and I did not find it. Did find a lot of energy, a lot of people very excited to see Kamala Harris.
Interesting. Yeah, a lot of the polling that we've seen, shows her doing more or less as well as Biden in North Carolina. So, I don't know.
I think a little less well, but I think she's
early.
She's a little less known.
Of course, yeah.
So, and she's she's been here a lot, but it has not been extensively covered. But yesterday, man, you couldn't swing a cat in that place without hitting a journalist. There were like 50 reporters in there.
Yeah, I think you noted that there were maybe 8 or 9 people who showed up at her last event in Durham, and then 50 or so. A lot of national folks come down from D.C. for this thing this week. So there is very much
a lot of interest there.
More attention on her.
And I will say that she did give Cooper a nice shout out. They knew each other back when they were both attorneys general. Mm-hmm. So they kind of worked together in that sense. And she gave him a nice shout out, and kind of joked about it and said what a great supporter he had been of the ticket, the Biden-Harris administration. So yeah, they usually thank their host, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
All right. Well, talking about how Cooper is term limited and not running for governor, let's talk about the race to replace him, Josh Stein versus Mark Robinson. I did a story on Monday about a fundraiser that Robinson hosted this week with leaders of the Word of Faith Church. This is a fairly large, several hundred members, but pretty secretive group out in Rutherford County in western North Carolina. And it has faced a whole lot of accusations over the years. Church leaders deny most of them, although a few have resulted in convictions. But Robinson said despite all of these accusations it faces, well, he declined to comment to me when I asked about it, but he then went on a conservative talk radio show and defended the church and said that people are just attacking the church to attack him. I should note, all of the accusations against the church started long before
2004, 2000,
the 90s.
Right.
This goes back a very long time. This church's long list of scandals, and a lot of them are still actively in court.
They've been investigated for what? Unemployment fraud, slavery, child abuse.
Yeah, a lot of there was a big investigation actually by the Brazilian government into a missionary program that they had been allegedly luring Brazilian pilgrims essentially up here and then seizing their passports, forcing them to work for free or for little pay. Several of them escaped or left and later talked to reporters about this. Church leaders again deny all of this, sure. But when you have these allegations of slavery and immigration fraud and child abuse and child sexual assault that has been covered up and all of these kinds of things, even if they haven't all led to convictions, there have been many allegations, and a lot of these are made by former members of the church. Right. Robinson, however, doubling down, on his support for the church, which has supported him with tens of thousands of dollars in campaign contributions as he is running for governor here. We saw him on Wednesday, and we tried to ask him some questions about this story, some other recent comments he had made, and that did not go so well.
No, and that's something that we do, right? I mean, we go to public events sometimes to buttonhole the politicians who appear at them afterward, and that's especially the case if they're hard to reach, if they're hard to get a hold of.
Right. You went to this Medicaid event to talk to
Cooper.
Roy Cooper about being VP.
Right. So there you go, Exhibit A. And Robinson is especially hard to get. We have made many, many interview requests, and they have not been granted. So, we waited till the event was over. We were talking to him on the way out. We asked him, about, could I ask you some questions? And another reporter said something about, who needs killing. That was in reference to that comment that made national headlines over the weekend about him saying that some folks need killing. And he just kind of came around on reporters and just told us we should be ashamed of ourselves and we're ruining the day for the person that had just gotten the award at the ceremony where he was hosting. It was a real, a lot of anger.
Yeah, I mean, I should note she was long gone by the time we started trying to ask him questions. But
yeah, but anyway, did not comment on that except to tell us that we should be ashamed for asking questions. So that's how that went. I don't know what else to tell you about that except that's not a normal reaction.
No. Normally, politicians do hang around and answer questions. In fact, at that exact same event, House Speaker Tim Moore hung around afterwards and did a little press conference with reporters. Did not tell us that we should be ashamed for asking him questions about politics. So, obviously, it is a heated race for governor. We did get some new campaign finance numbers today, at least from the Stein campaign. He, as of the end of June, had raised $33 million. Which is a pretty staggering amount of money.
That's a lot for governor.
Yeah.
In this state.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Mark Robinson's campaign has not yet released its most recent numbers. I asked when they're going to release theirs, have not heard back. But as of January, he had raised around $10 million.
Right. But don't forget, they just passed that change to campaign finance laws that may make it easier for out-of-state donors to send some big contributions his way. Through PACs, without being identifiable. And also, I think I have heard that he is supposed to speak at the RNC, although I have not been able to confirm that with his people.
Interesting. Well, that would certainly help boost his fundraising efforts.
His profile, for sure.
But yeah, so we'll see. I mean, as you mentioned, the change to campaign finance laws that GOP lawmakers passed, I mean, the stated reason for that was to, quote, level the playing field for Robinson in the governor's race. So once we get these new numbers, which go through the end of June, we should see if that has started working for him or not.
Well, it probably won't show up until we get to July and August, I wouldn't think, just because of when it passed. But, we should see it. We should see some indication of it. I think we already are, because I'm seeing a lot of anti-Stein ads, and I think that's RGA money coming in. So...
And I think Robinson has started with his first round of advertising as well.
Right. There's some pro-Robinson and also some anti-Stein out there.
Yeah.
So.
I should note it is not only Robinson and the Republicans who are drawing some controversy for fundraisers. Also, Friday night in Charlotte, former U.S. Attorney General Eric Holder is going to be hosting a fundraiser where Supreme Court Justices Anita Earls and Allison Riggs are scheduled to speak, as well as all of the Democratic Party's nominees this year for statewide judicial races, which include Riggs and also a whole list of candidates for the Court of Appeals.
Eric Holder is a former Attorney General under the
Obama
administration, right? But he's since become something of a Democratic gadfly, I guess, when it comes to redistricting, and has filed a whole lot of lawsuits in front of a whole lot of courts, including in North Carolina.
Yes,
right?
He has paid for lots of lawsuits in North Carolina. So the fact that he is going to this event with sitting Supreme Court justices where they're talking about the theme of this fundraiser is redistricting.
Oh my gosh.
And I think it's the importance of electing Democratic judges before 2030, which is, of course, the next time that we'll be doing redistricting. They're there to get a bunch of money from Eric Holder. Eric Holder is the same guy who funds redistricting lawsuits that get heard by the courts here in North Carolina.
This seems awfully close. Yeah.
Yes. The Republican Party told me that this is, quote, appalling that they would be doing this and that it is an instance of trying to buy the judiciary. Now, I should note, of course, Republican donors have also paid many, many, many millions of dollars in their own efforts to successfully flip the control of the Supreme Court from Democratic control to Republican control. So, neither side here
kettle
really has a high ground to stand on. But it's just, it's a symptom of how we handle judicial elections here in North Carolina in partisan races where candidates are allowed to and really have to seek out donations from big money donors. And that includes, not just national political groups and political activists, but also plenty of local lawyers who will have cases before the court, business groups who have, vested interests in how the court rules. There's a lot of issues like that, really cause judges to have to walk this really fine line between operating as a politician and actually getting yourself elected to office versus being able to convince voters that, hey, all of that stuff that I did and said when I was running for office, I can set that aside when I'm on the bench and only use the exact law itself to make my decisions.
Trying to imagine what it would look like if the U.S. Supreme Court had to do this. Talk about expensive, right? Elections.
All right. Well, let's take a break there and come back, and we're going to talk a little bit more about some action from the legislature, new laws that we've had, new vetoes that the governor has issued, and what's next for RFK Jr. and Cornel West. Stick around. All right. Welcome back to The Wrap. I am Will Doran here with Laura Leslie. We are talking about the busy week that it was in state politics and probably the busy week that it's going to be next week. Kicking off, at least on Tuesday, we've got a State Board of Elections meeting.
We do.
Laura, what are they going to be talking about?
Probably the same thing they were talking about this week, which is other parties. So there are 3 parties that are trying to get on the ticket. And the reason for this is, well, not the only reason, but if you're an independent candidate, you have to get 70,000 something.
I think it's more. I think it's 80.
Maybe signatures to get on the ballot statewide, right? But if you are a party, that drops substantially.
Which doesn't make any sense to me.
No, it kind of doesn't. But okay. But anyway, so we've got a couple of folks who want to get on the ballot, namely RFK Jr. and Cornel West. And so both of their parties, that's We the People for RFK Jr. and Justice for All, I think it is, for Cornel West, are trying to get on the ballot so their nominees can be up there for president in November. And the Constitution Party also, and they are nominating Randall Terry as a noted anti-abortion activist. So all 3 had applied. The Constitution Party got approved this past week, but they said they needed more time to review the petitions, the signatures on the petitions for RFK Jr. and Cornel West, because they said that there were some questions about how they were gathered and whether voters were misled at the time that they were signing the petitions, thinking that they were trying to get the presidential candidate on and not the party.
Right. And well, that's kind of the thing, the Constitution Party, which has been allowed on the ballot, isn't only planning to run a candidate for president. They're going to run a candidate at least for governor and lieutenant governor, and it sounds like they're also thinking of running candidates for other offices.
Right.
These parties that RFK Jr. and Cornel West started aren't doing that. They don't have any other candidates. It's only for them to run for president, and cynics would say it's only for them to have to gather fewer signatures in their attempts to run for president.
Right. But of course, the fact that they have not automatically put them on the ballot after having gotten the signatures has caused great consternation and uproar among the Republican side of the legislature, with lawmakers calling for oversight hearings. They want to question them to testify under oath about what they're, and not just the legislature, but Congress. Jim Jordan and the House Judiciary Committee has sent them a request to come up with documentation explaining why they haven't let these other parties on the ticket.
Right. And of course, Cornel West, who is a very far left-wing activist and theologian, he would obviously only be drawing votes from Joe Biden.
Sure.
There are no Donald Trump voters who would maybe vote for Cornel West. RFK Jr., from the polling we've seen, he would probably draw votes from both Trump and from Biden, but maybe he would draw more from Biden. But either way, Republicans say that the reason why the Democrats on the board aren't approving these candidates is not for the legal reasons and concerns that they have. It's purely to protect Biden. And the board did do the same thing in 2022. Not the same thing, but they
similar thing
with
the Green Party.
With the Green Party, wouldn't let them on the ballot. The Green Party sued. The court said, "Yeah, you should be on the ballot." They let them on the ballot. And again, Green Party is a left party. Board of Elections controlled by Democrats. So this is not the first time that the board has taken an action that has led critics to say that it's purely doing this to protect the Democratic candidates on the ballot.
But, it's interesting. We got some new polling numbers this week. Morning Consult and I can't remember who they're in conjunction with, put out a poll, nationwide poll. They do state by state, which is fantastic, if you ask me. Thank you. And really great numbers and really great crosstabs. But they asked voters here, how they would vote if it was just Trump and Biden. And I think Biden was 43 and Trump was 46, right? And then they give them the selection with all the other folks on the ballot that they could choose. And Trump actually lost 2 points and Biden only lost 1.
Which is so fascinating to me because there was some polling, I think it was back in April, that found like RFK Jr. was getting I think it was double digits or at least close to it, support here in North Carolina. And now, even since then, Trump has been convicted of 34 felonies. Biden has had his disastrous debate and then continued series of flubs in his attempts to make up for that disastrous debate. You would think that people would be looking more seriously into third-party candidates. So it was really interesting to me to see that number actually dropped. Again, it's very early.
It's early, and people are still learning about candidates. I mean, it's still early. I mean, people don't really – well, okay, the conventional wisdom used to be people didn't really start paying attention to the presidential race until after Labor Day, right? Back to school.
Right.
That's when – but, I mean, we have the never-ending political campaign now. So, I can't think that most people aren't at least aware of the presidential campaign long before Labor Day, but I don't know. Maybe I'm speaking for myself only there. We should mention this week a big, not an upset, but Blue Cross, the insurer Blue Cross, had gone to court to try to overturn a decision by the state health plan to move its provider to change its provider to Aetna. Mm-hmm. Plan manager. And Blue Cross has had it for 40, 50 years. I don't know. It's
been decades, yeah.
Yeah, as long as there's been a state health plan, I'm pretty sure.
It has been Blue Cross.
And they moved it to Aetna. And a judge agreed that they had done nothing wrong this week. Yeah.
The Blue Cross lost this fight. They can appeal it, and I would expect them to appeal it because they have already spent millions of dollars fighting this.
And this is a massive chunk of their business.
Oh, this is a multi-billion-dollar contract.
Right.
And I mean, hundreds of people, jobs could be at stake, maybe 1,000 plus, I think, from some of the stuff I've read. Now, of course, some of them might get hired by Aetna. But there are also real questions on what this is going to mean for state employees. Blue Cross said that the reason they lost this contract was because they have been tussling politically with Dale Folwell for a long time, who is the state treasurer and in charge of the state health plan. And they said that, because of all this kind of, political back and forth between them, that, Folwell and the state health plan kind of put its thumb on the scale to change how the contract went down.
It is fair to say that he is not a fan of Blue Cross.
No. Yeah. He has been attacking them for many years. And, they've been fighting back as well. There's no love lost between those two. And so their claim was that state health plan had kind of put its thumb on the scale to let Aetna have the contract, even though, in their opinion, they should have won. Said, if you would have read it this way, it would have done this. And they also said, hey, look, here at Blue Cross, we have more providers in rural parts of the state than Aetna does. There's a concern that if you make this change, state employees who live in more rural areas of North Carolina could end up losing their doctors. Aetna has countered, we have more providers in urban areas, which is where most state employees live. So, people might actually have more options for healthcare if it goes through. So, there's that back and forth. There's also the issue of what's going to happen to premiums if this goes through. Blue Cross and Aetna had different schemes for, how much they were going to charge and how much was going to be in claims versus administrative fees and what they were going to do if they went over. So, it's hard to say right now up front, if Aetna gets this long term, will your premiums go up? Will they go down? We don't know. but it could definitely change just because the way that they do their financing is different from Blue Cross. So
I think it's also fair to point out or important to note that another big issue with the Blue Cross contract was there was a new interface or a new kind of software that was introduced, and apparently it was just I won't say a disaster, but it did not go well. Right.
It did not. I was in court for some of the trial, and they kind of acknowledged that yeah, they had this big kind of rollout of this new claim system that had been pretty flawed.
Right. And Falwell and the state, and we should mention that it wasn't just Falwell's decision. It was a state health plan board that made that decision. And they heard a lot about it from state employees. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, there's that as well.
Yep. So we'll see. Right now, Aetna's got it. Supposed to start on January 1st if it goes through and there's no appeal. But like I said, I will be shocked if there is no appeal on that.
In the meantime, legislators finally left town.
Only to now be coming back soon.
Only to now. They already came back once. That was this week. Also this week. So Cooper signed a bunch of the bills that they sent him, including one that kind of popped up at the last minute, basically banning most of the vape products that are sold in most vape shops, which is really interesting. I mean, this is going to make a state registry of products, vaping products that have been FDA approved, and that is a short list.
It is a very short list. And, what we heard from backers of this, and I think it passed unanimously or at least
close.
Nearly unanimously, was that, it's about protecting kids. And there's all this junk coming in from China. It's not been vetted.
And it's flavored in ways that's illegal in the U.S., like, bubble gum, popcorn.
Right. Stuff that could be seen as marketing to children. And so they say, if we crack down on that kind of stuff, that's going to help protect our kids and also adults who are smoking who knows what kind of chemicals that are made by these. Now, if you look at the short list of vapes that have been approved, one of the very, very few on the list is North Carolina's own R.J. Reynolds, who also had a whole lot of lobbyists scurrying around the legislature when this bill was being written and then testifying about it in committee and how great it's going to be for protecting children. The Reynolds fingerprints were all over this, but that doesn't mean that it also won't be good for health. I mean, I think a lot of people do appreciate the FDA and the work it does to vet things.
I would, well, those aren't the people who are buying that vaping product, right? I would really anticipate a lawsuit on this one because I have a really hard time seeing how this doesn't get challenged by some of the small business groups.
Yeah, well, and we heard it from some of the lobbyists for the small business groups. And, they were saying this is going to shut down a whole lot of smoke shops and potentially even convenience stores who make huge margins on these products and, are
in an otherwise slim margin business.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. We should also mention ABC reform. You can now buy to-go cocktails again. Woohoo! It's Friday. Childcare funding with some, but not enough. How did we get saved, but enough to get them to the end of the year?
Yeah, and that was kind of the goal. Lawmakers are just the House and the Senate are so fed up with one another over the failed budget negotiations that they basically put this childcare funding placeholder in, and they said, okay, here's a few $1 million. It's not going to be nearly enough to do what we need to do, but at least get us a few months down the road, and then maybe when we're less mad at one another, we can come back and try for a more permanent solution. So we'll see how that goes, but
and we should mention that Cooper has vetoed a handful of the bills that they sent him at the end.
Yes, there was a kind of again this obscure bill that came out of kind of nowhere towards the end of the session about like government-backed cryptocurrency. Apparently, this is something the Fed is working on. Cooper said
it would be a digital currency is the idea, and I think there are other countries who are already dealing with this.
Yeah, there wasn't really any discussion of this at the legislature.
No, that was what was so weird. It was like
up,
this seems like a big can of worms to open.
Yeah. Who knows? Cooper vetoed it. He said, look, we shouldn't be banning the government from looking into this kind of stuff, experimenting with it. Like, let's just let the Fed do what it's been doing and see how it goes.
Is this a gold standard thing?
I think it's. I think it is supported by a lot of the same people who talk about the gold standard.
Okay. All right.
Some other bills that he vetoed, one essentially making it easier to evict folks, another dealing with like renters' rights.
Well, and what was important about that one is it basically would have said that towns and counties can't tell apartment owners that they have to rent to people who have public housing money.
Right. Yeah. If you're getting Section 8 funding,
right.
Should you be banned from applying?
Exactly. And some towns have ordinances that say, cities that say that you can't discriminate against people, on the grounds of Section 8. This would have banned towns from doing that. Right. And that's one of the reasons that Cooper vetoed it. Exactly.
And he's vetoed a few others. There was one that would allow basically people to drive gators on highways, those kind of ATV four-wheelers. Apparently a lot of beach communities like to do this.
On highways, though?
Yeah, well, because they can't go fast enough
right.
To be street legal, but they would like to be allowed to drive them on the highway anyway so that they can get from their house to the beach. Cooper vetoed that. He vetoed these wide-ranging changes to the building code rules that, home builders have said that, they want this to, basically help their industry out. And if you...
Sure, but it would be by cutting their costs,
right.
not requiring some upgrades in terms of efficiency and sustainability.
Right. So it's basically a question of, home builders say this will lead to short-term cost savings, help housing prices keep from rising as quick.